Well, I want to say good afternoon to everyone. The High Society is thrilled to be able to bring this program to you today. For those of you who don't know me, I am Alan Geeter. I, along with Corinne Ferraro, are the co-chairs of Bethel's High Society. Before we begin our program, I would like to give a special thanks to Judy and Al Greenspoon for putting this program together. They worked with the Cantor and got it going. And I would like to this opportunity to tell everybody that on Saturday, November 6th, during the Shabbat service, the High Society, as part of our annual Veterans Day program, will read the roll call honoring Bethel's living veterans. And please watch your emails for special information for veterans on how to add your name to the roll call. I would also like to give special thanks to Lydia Lutt. She is the person behind the scenes who makes all these Zoom programs happen and gets those all-important emails to us. Back to today. I am excited to have Cantor Joseph Ness with us. He has thrilled us for so many years with those spectacular Bema concerts. Today, though, he will be presenting a multimedia program discussing the life and music of George Gershwin, and emphasis on the Jewish influences on his compositions. Cantor Ness, take it away.
Hi, everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to be here with you all, and we can start presently. Let's just start with a little piece of music by a fairly well-known singer, Ella Fitzgerald.
The First Lady of Song, is that her nickname? Maybe so. Maybe so. Summertime. And the living is easy. Fish are jumping. Is high. Your daddy's rich, and your mom is good looking. So hush, baby, one of these mornings, you're gonna rise up soon. Then you spread your wings, and you take to the sky. But till that morning, there's nothing can harm you with daddy and mommy
An interesting introduction to this lecture, which is about the music of George Gershwin, also about his life and what were his influences and where he comes from and that kind of thing. So he calls himself, Gershwin calls himself a man without traditions. You know, although most early 20th century American composers kind of eschewed tradition, many composers, Dane Rudyard, not that you've heard of him, but he was a man that occupied kind of spirituality with music, and obviously to Aaron Copland's use of jazz rhythms and Charles Ives' kind of muscular cacophonic, you know, compositions. All of these composers and many more didn't necessarily look at themselves as coming from the tradition. Gershwin's approach was viewed somewhat cynically. His concert works were labeled as tainted products of an outsider, and more than that, an uneducated outsider, and we'll have more to talk about that later. Larry Starr, who I believe teaches in Washington University, is a musicologist. He's, I believe, recently retired, but he crystallizes this anomaly pretty succinctly. He writes, there was simply no pre-existing model for the kind of American composer that Gershwin became. He had to invent himself each step of the way, and it stands to reason that his remarkable success in doing so was met with skepticism and resentment by those personally invested in more traditional musical paths. Gershwin was of Russian and Lithuanian Jewish ancestry. His grandfather, Yakov Gershwin, was born on the Black Sea, Odessa, and served for 25 years as a mechanic for the Imperial Russian Army, reason being that he wanted to earn the right of free travel and living rights as a Jew. So he finally retires near St. Petersburg, and he has a teenage son by the name of Moshe Gershwin. At that point, Moshe was working as a leather cutter for women's shoes. Moshe Gershwin meets and falls in love with Rosa Brushkina, who was not from Russia, but she was from Lithuania and Vilnius, to be specific, Vilna, which was, you know, over that late 19th century, early 20th century, a hub, and even way before that, a hub of Jewish study, culture, and tradition. So she and her family, after she meets Moshe, she moves to New York because specifically of increasing anti-Jewish sentiment in Russia. She changes her name. Instead of Roja, she's in an English-speaking country in the New York area, obviously, Rose. So her name is Rose Brushkina. Moshe, however, then realizes he has to have compulsory military service if he remains in Russia, moves to America as soon as he could afford to. He comes to New York, obviously. He changes his name, instead of Moshe, to Morris. Gershwin lived with an uncle in Brooklyn, worked as a foreman in a women's shoe factory. He marries Rose July 21st, 1895. Right away, he Americanizes his last name from Gershwin to Gershwin, Gershwine. And their first child, a boy, Ira, was born 1 year later, December 6th, 1896, after which the family moves into a second-floor apartment in Brooklyn, 242 Snedeker Avenue, that is area code 11207. I was a taxi driver in my earlier life, and so I know that area code. They rented that building for $15 a month for a two-story apartment building. And so now it is a newer building with a bagel cafe and a nail salon on the bottom floor. So on September 26, 1898, George was born as the second son to Morris and Rose. His birth certificate identifies him as Jacob Gershwin. Okay, the surname pronounced Gershwin in the Russian and Yiddish immigrant community. He has one given name, contrary to the American practice of giving children both a first and a middle name. He was named after his grandfather. As we mentioned before, his name was Yaakov, so his Jacob Gershwin. His grandfather, we mentioned the army mechanic. He soon becomes known as George and changes his name right around the time he becomes a professional, which is in his teen years, to Gershwin, Gershwin without the E. Okay, now just to give you a little more background of his early life, there are, after Ira and George, one other boy, Arthur, is born, Arthur, in 1900, and a girl, Frances, 1906. So we're talking about a family of 6, 2 adults, 4 children. The family lives in many different residences because their father changed, living places because of each new business that he became involved in. They grew up mostly in the Yiddish Theater District, which is in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. And George and Ira were fascinated with the local Yiddish theaters. And George occasionally appears on stage as an extra. George is a boy, a normal boy. He, running around with his friends, roller skating, misbehaving in the streets until 1908, which is, he was about 10 years old. He didn't really have much connection with music. Then a friend of his by the name Maxie Rosenzweig was a violin player, and he gave a recital, and all of a sudden George is captivated. Okay, the sound and the sound of the violin and the piano just got him. At the same time, about the same time, his parents buy a piano so that Ira could learn how to play piano. But to his parents' surprise and to Ira's relief, it was George who spent more time playing, as George continued to enjoy the piano. By the way, his younger sister, Frances, was the first in the family to make something of a living through her music talents. She marries young, devotes herself to being a mother and housewife, and obviously that precluded spending any serious time on her musical endeavors. After giving up her performing career, she settles upon painting as a creative outlet, which also had been a hobby George did. And by the way, he was a wonderful painter. Arthur Gershwin, the youngest brother, follows in George's paths and Ira's. He's a composer of songs, musicals, and short piano works, none of which they've survived, but obviously they don't have the carrying power of both of his brothers' works. George tries various piano teachers for about 2 years, 1911 to 1913, something like that, before being introduced to a guy by the name of Charles Hambitzer. Okay, he's the pianist in what is called the Beethoven Symphony Orchestra. There were many, many, many more symphony orchestras in New York, not just the Philharmonic and the Brooklyn Symphony in those days. It was much more culturally diverse, as far as I can tell, what I read. So this Hambitzer guy teaches Gershwin piano until he passes away in 1918. Conventional piano technique, introduces Gershwin to European classical tradition and wants him to attend orchestral concerts. Let's go into the family life a little more. Gershwin's family, their Judaism was neither religious particularly, nor political even, but more cultural, casual. But in a 1938 interview, Rosa Rose, right? We remember her, George's mother. Now this is around the time that Gershwin passes away. It's horrible, from a brain tumor. So he's 39, I believe, when he passed away. But anyway, they interviewed his mother, and she says, we weren't really Orthodox. The only kind of tenement I had was I believe in the Ten Commandments, but the home was strictly kosher, strictly Orthodox, and the children, the four, actually probably the three, the boys, were taught by rabbis and were all bar mitzvah. Those are her words. So George's aunt remembers Passover Seders regularly hosted by Moshe, his father. So they did Passover Seders, little tidbits you get out of the family. Later on, years later, the famous actress Kitty Carlisle, some of you may know that name, spoke of attending a Gershwin Seder, family Seder. There were co-hosts, George and Oscar Levant. He was a pianist and a wonderful musician himself. They presided over a service, and the way Kitty Carlisle describes it, it's a kind of a mad, jazzy rhythm, kind of a big joke. So they must have had fun. So let's talk about Gershwin when he we will play some music in the next few minutes, as is my want. I want you to hear the stuff. But in 1913, Gershwin's 15 years old, and he begins his career as a song plugger. Okay, let me just explain what a song plugger is. When you want to buy the copy, the song sheets, they had what they call song pluggers, which would play on the mezzanine level of a department store and play the song for those who wanted to buy it. They would ask for a song, and they would send the music to the song plugger, and he, by the way, song pluggers were not only pianists, they were singers. People would demonstrate just to get people to buy the stuff. Again, this is not now, this is more than 100 years ago. So to earn extra money, George worked as a rehearsal pianist for Broadway singers. And I should say, probably Yiddish, Broadway was in its infant stages then. So maybe not Broadway singers, but maybe the Yiddish theater and that kind of thing. In 1916, he composes his first published song. Great title, When You Want 'Em, You Can't Get 'Em. Okay. He's 18 years old. It earned him 50 cents. His first big hit was a piece called Swanee, composed, I think it was like 10 minutes. He said he composed, he was riding a bus from somewhere to somewhere, just threw it down on paper, and there is Swanee. Not long afterwards, the singer Al Jolson heard it, recorded it, and Swanee sold more than 1 million sheet music copies and an estimated 2 million records. Over time, it became the biggest selling song of Gershwin's career. And this is before he really starts. But okay, so here is the inimitable Al Jolson singing Swanee.
How I love you, my dear old Swanee. I'd give the world to be among the folk in a T-I-X. I even know my nanny waiting for me, praying for me down a mile of Swanee. The folks up north will see me no more when I go through that Swanee song. Swanee, Swanee, I am coming back to Swanee. Mammy, I love the old folks at home. Swanee, how I love you, my dear old Swanee. I give the world to thee among the folks in a T-I-X. I even know my mammy waiting for me. praying for me down by Latwani. The folks up north will see me no more when I go to Latwani shore.
So I'm thinking that this might give some of you, actually most of you, a little sense of maybe some history of this era. We move on. He also records Gershwin, that is, piano rolls. I don't know if you've ever been to like I remember I've gone into some hotels and they had in the lobby a piano that you know that you see the notes moving but no one's playing. So, but obviously someone did pre-record those things, and Gershwin was one of those people who recorded many piano rolls of his music and others. In 1916, he recorded, and we have it, a piano roll medley, including Dos Pintalayid, which was at that time a very popular Yiddish song. This little clip I want to play, I don't know if it will play the whole thing. Maybe we'll see. This is John Schoenberger, and this is a piece called Whispering. I believe that's what it's called. And let's just listen to, when you listen to this, it's a really great piece, by the way, and it's not by Gershwin, but also note the fabulous technique that Gershwin has as a pianist. You know, I know the wise thing is to cut it in mid piece because we have to move on, but it's just such a pleasure and really fascinating to hear a a pianist like that in terms of even the style of piano playing. And it's a wonderful cultural experience to hear this. Moving on, I'd like to say something about Tin Pan Alley, okay? Here you see a picture of that general area. You see a lot of music publishers, and you see the sign up there, and just a whole, it was basically a physical location in New York City for music publishers and songwriters who pretty much dominated the popular music of the United States from the late 19th century into the early 20th century. Tin Pan Alley was the popular music publishing center of the world between 1885 to the 1920s. And so where is it located? For those New Yorkers and those who are not, it is West 28th Street between 5th and 6th Avenues in New York City. Here is an example of someone who whose music was really publicized and published by the Tin Pan Alley, a gentleman by the name of Stephen Foster. So his songs probably generated millions of dollars over the years in sheet music sales, but Foster saw little of it and died in poverty. With stronger copyright protection laws in the late 1800s, songwriters, composers, lyricists, and publishers started working together for mutual financial benefit. Obviously, Stephen Foster was a little before the Tin Pan Alley. He probably would have benefited greatly from their unions and that kind of thing. So following the Civil War, more than 25,000 new pianos were sold each year. And by 1887, over 500,000 kids in this country were studying piano. So the demand for sheet music indicated the size of the market for publishers, hence Tin Pan Alley. Here's another interesting tidbit about Tin Pan Alley. The name Tin Pan Alley is attributed to a newspaper writer by the name of Monroe Rosenfeld. While he was staying in New York, he coins the term Tin Pan Alley to kind of articulate the cacophony of dozens of pianos being pounded at once in publishers' demo rooms. He said it sounded like hundreds of people pounding on tin pans. So in addition, additionally, vaudeville played a huge role in the story of American popular song. And quite frankly, we can give a number of lectures about just that, about the Tin Pan Alley and its influences. These shows, these vaudeville shows, were a really effective showcase for new music. The publishing houses profited tremendously from the sale of the songs made popular by these shows. This, by the way, you know, I remember we were talking about song pluggers, and here was another song plugger, Irving Berlin. Another one was Jerome Kern. So all these guys were in this culture. Moving on. So the Tin Pan Alley, which is a really important place for the influence where George Gershwin comes up with his music. The Tin Pan Alley begins to dissipate around the start of the Depression in the 1930s, specifically because the phonograph and radio supplanted sheet music as the driving force in American popular music. Some consider Tin Pan Alley to have continued into the 1950s, where earlier styles of American popular music were upstaged, thrown out by the rise of rock and roll. And here's another, it's a fascinating subject, and I wish we can go deeper into it. We don't have time. The music publishers of this time, during the Tin Pan Alley days, followed the racial codes of the day. They either had their own typically white contract writers composing songs. If they opened their doors to publish songs of others, they would hide the fact that the songs were created by non-white or non-Christian artists. Jewish songwriters often adopted anglicized names in order for their songs to be published. And this was necessary at a time when anti-Semitism was fairly widespread in this country. So in the 1930s, Some publishers in the Brill building, which is also the part of Tin Pan Alley, did specialize in publishing the songs of African-American swing composers. Gershwin's early works for the stage are mostly done with the lyricist Buddy DeSilva, and together, this is before the time where Gershwin really did amazing genius works with his brother Ira, but Buddy DeSilva and George Gershwin creates an experimental one-act jazz opera, Blue Monday it's called, and it's set in Harlem. And quite frankly, it is regarded as the forerunner to the great, great opera, Porgy and Bess, of which we will talk about. Another show, which was with both of them, DeSilva and Gershwin, was called Scandal. And this is Gershwin and his brother Ira. And what we want to talk about the show Scandal, I'd like to play a piece, one of Gershwin's great, great songs, Somebody Loves Me. This is a beautiful song, and let's give it a listen. If I can find here we go. You might know the singer.
Somebody loves me, I wonder who she can be. Somebody needs me, I wish that I knew who she can be, worries me. Every girl that passes by, I shout, hey, maybe you were meant to be my loving baby. You were meant to be my baby. Somebody loves me, I wonder who. Maybe it's you. Won't you believe me? Somebody loves me. I wonder who that baby can be. She's a killer, thriller. Somebody wants me. I wish that I knew who she can be. Worries me. Every girl that passes by, I shout, hey, maybe, baby, it's you. You were meant to be my ever-loving baby. Somebody loves me, I just wonder who. Oh, maybe it's you.
Okie doke. By the way, no, let's go on. So in 1924, that was 1920. 4 years later, George and Ira get together and they collaborate on a stage musical comedy, Lady Be Good, which included such fabulous songs as Fascinating Rhythm, also Oh Lady Be Good. And we don't have the time to play all of them. Maybe if we did 4 lectures on Gershwin, we can do that, and that may be the way to go. After that show, they follow it with OK, O, comma, O-H, and then K, K-A-Y, in 1926. In 1927, Funny Face, and in 1927, also Strike Up the Band. 1930, this is all Broadway stuff, Girl Crazy, which introduces the song I Got Rhythm. We did a piano version of that before we started this lecture with that Japanese pianist, wonderful version. A V.I. Sing in 1931 was the first musical comedy to win a Pulitzer Prize. And it wasn't for musical comedy, it was for drama, which I don't understand. It's a fabulous comedy on the perils of politics in this country. And I'll leave that at that. Let's just talk about I Got Rhythm, the song. A number of these songs would be transferred from one musical to the other. Again, I Got Rhythm. So the first time we see that song, and it was done as a slow song in 1928, a very unknown play called Treasure Girl, musical, excuse me. I don't think it maybe had one or two showings on Broadway and was not successful, but that was the first time it is. Then Girl Crazy, that's when it really worked out. By the way, the woman who sang it was a singer by the name of Ethel Merman. I'm hoping you know that name, all of you, or some of you. By the way, Gershwin, when he hears Ethel Merman, says something like, listen, don't take voice lessons. Don't take voice lessons. Just sing the way you are. Fabulous. Of Thee I Sing. Oh, and so this song, I Got Rhythm, Girl Crazy 1928, 1930, and then puts it also into the Of Thee I Sing musical. So he transfers occasionally a song from one musical to another. Okay. Late at night, on the 3rd of January, 1924, Gershwin, George, and Ira, and lyricist, we mentioned his name, Buddy DeSilva, were just hanging out at the Ambassador Billiard Parlor. I guess they were playing billiards at 52nd Street on Broadway, when an item in the amusement section of the New York Tribune, one of the many, many papers in that city in those days, caught Ira's attention. And listen to this. It was about a concert of new American music to be given by Paul Whiteman and his Palais Royal Band at the Aeolian Hall on the 12th of February. Now, again, I'm going to say this again. This is the 3rd of January. They're in the billiard hall, and they read the notice that there's a concert given 5 weeks later, 5.5 weeks later, on the 12th of February, in honor of Abraham Lincoln's birthday. What the article says is George Gershwin is at work on a jazz concerto, okay? Then it says Irving Berlin is writing a syncopated tone poem. This is the first time George heard about it. So he's in a real bind because his musical comedy, Little Sweet Devil, is another one, was set to open in 3 weeks. And now all of a sudden someone's saying he's writing a concerto that is going to be done on February 12th. That's a tall order for anyone to write a concerto in 4 weeks and have it done. So what happens? Paul Whiteman, he was probably the most popular band leader in the 20s. His nickname was the King of Jazz, although he didn't really do jazz with his band. It was more of a large dance orchestra that used jazz musicians from time to time. But Whiteman, obviously, he contacts Gershwin maybe the next day or so. He twists his arm that all Gershwin had to do was supply a piano score. That's all he had to do, write a piano score. And he had a great orchestrator by the name of Ferdy Grofé. He's an in-house arranger. He'll orchestrate the piece and everything will work out. So when Gershwin is on the train to Boston for rehearsals of that musical, Sweet Little Devil, he sketches out a framework for the new piece, which he began writing on the 7th of January. That's 4 days after he reads it in this article in that paper. Okay, so over the next few days, he's also making last-minute changes to the Sweet Little Devil, that play, for its New York opening on the 24th of January. Actually, I don't know if on the 24th of January, that's when he completes his 2-piano score of this piano piece. It's going to be called Rhapsody, okay? So the Rhapsody with a composer, obviously Rhapsody in Blue, the Rhapsody with the composer as soloist was premiered in front of a packed house that included in the audience the composer Rachmaninoff, the violinist Fritz Kreisler, and the conductor Leopold Stokowski. And by the way, adding to the intrigue of this little piece, he didn't really write much of the piano part down, okay? Most of it was improvised, and that is at the concert. Having said that, he did I would assume he wrote, and I would love to see the score, the original sketches. That would be amazing. But I would sing that he would give the harmonic tapestry for the piece, and through the harmonic, plan, Gershwin would improvise these little piano things. Huge success. Huge success. Rhapsody in Blue. And I'm sorry I have to cut it off because we want to end at a time that is allows you to prepare and enjoy the rest of the day. 1 year later, from the Rhapsody in Blue, Gershwin, using this kind of jazz influenced classical style, because they're both. You can even, when I listen to Gershwin and I hear the Rhapsody in Blue, and specifically the next piece we're going to talk about, there are really Russian elements of piano writing. And so you hear some of the gestures of a Rachmaninoff or something like that, that kind of Russian influence in his piano writing. But anyway, he writes this piano concerto in F. It was premiered by the composer, as he's a fabulous pianist, with the New York Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Walter Damrosch. Several letters exist in which George asks God for various positive developments in his life, including one which he writes, "I pray to God that he will send me good blues for my concerto." Let's just listen to a little of that concerto. 1 second. etc. It's a beautiful concerto. For those of you who don't know it, I very, very strongly suggest that you look for it, whether on YouTube or at a concert. Hopefully that will happen sooner than later. And obviously, we've been living in very tough times with regard to live music. And hopefully at Bethel, we are planning a concert, just that you know, on the 5th of December with some really fabulous musicians. So anyway, that's for another time. Okay, Gershwin always wants to study, always wants to study. He's fascinated by modern music. The composers he wants to, I don't know, emulate, but he wants to know more about are Alban Berg, the great student of Arnold Schoenberg, Shostakovich, Dmitri Shostakovich, the Russian, Igor Stravinsky, Darius Milhaud, and Schoenberg himself. You know, Gershwin travels to Paris to study with Nadia Boulanger, the great composition teacher of the 20th century, probably, well, along with Schoenberg. She was afraid when he sees her, she said, you know, rigorous classical study would ruin your jazz-influenced style. So, but while he's in Paris, why not get creative? And he writes the wonderful orchestral piece, American in Paris. By the way, two more composers I'd like to talk about in terms of who he wanted to study with, Maurice Ravel, and I'm going to also mention Stravinsky again. Let me give you the two stories quickly. So he's in 1928, Ravel comes over for some concerts in New York, and Gershwin asks Ravel, is there any possibility that I can take lessons from you? So Ravel is purported to say, why would you want to be a second-rate Ravel when you could be a first-rate Gershwin? Here's Stravinsky's story. So somehow Gershwin asks Stravinsky, would you be able to teach me? And Stravinsky asks Gershwin then, again, this is all apocryphal, but it's fun to tell. Could have happened. Stravinsky tells Gershwin, well, how much do you make a year? So I believe Gershwin told him something like between $100,000 and $200,000 a year, because he was very well off in the Broadway stuff, you know, the Broadway repertoire. And Stravinsky says, really, I think I want to ask you to teach me. So it was funny. By the way, he asks Schoenberg, who he also painted. Look at the beautiful painting. This is a very, very good likeness of Schoenberg. So obviously, Gershwin really is wonderful. By the way, Gershwin plays tennis with and was Gershwin's caddy when Gershwin had concerts around California. Gershwin also lived in the Beverly Hills area for a little while, you know, when he was in the States. And anyway, so Gershwin replies to, Schoenberg replies to Gershwin when Gershwin asks him to be his teacher. He says, I would only make you a bad Schoenberg, and you're such a good Gershwin already. And there are other composers who ask, Edgar Varese, other people too. By the way, this is the man with the tennis racket is Arnold Schoenberg and his family. He was a big tennis guy. This Alban Berg, most of you don't know his music. He's one of the great, great composers of the 20th century. He was a student of Arnold Schoenberg and also utilized in many of his compositions the 12-tone method of composing, but in a very different way than Schoenberg did. His violin concerto is one of the most riveting pieces of music written in the 20th century, incredibly heartfelt and emotionally rife with such kind of moments. Anyway, this photograph of Berg was on Gershwin's desk in Gershwin's composition room. Porgy and Bess. This, to my mind, is, well, everybody's mind, this is his most ambitious composition, Porgy and Bess. He calls it a folk opera. The story was by Dubois Hayward, and the libretto was by his brother Ira. The setting takes place in the fictional neighborhood of Catfish Row in South Carolina. The opera contains some of Gershwin's most sophisticated music and some huge, what I would call hit arias, Summertime, I Got Plenty of Nuttin', It Ain't Necessarily So. So when it was first performed in 1935, it was a box office flop. And as most of us would attest, it is now widely regarded as one of the most important American operas of the 20th century. I would probably say it is the most important opera of the 20th century. You know, the basis for this work was Gershwin's deep interest in both Catfish Row and the Jewish shtetl. The Gershwin family had some residences. They moved around, as I mentioned before, but they had a number of residences in Harlem, and it brought George in contact with the Black population there. And he travels also through the Gullah region, Gullah, the region of South Carolina, to conduct research for Porgy, during which he developed an even stronger feeling for African-American culture. There is a particularly fascinating Jewish angle in the song, I have to say it. It Ain't Necessarily So, obviously from Porgy, in which Gershwin parodies religious fundamentalism through dope peddling con man Sportin' Life, who scolds and mocks the other residents of Catfish Row in Charleston for believing various biblical stories. So Gershwin's melody for the songs, the well-known refrain, is the traditional tune. There's a kind of a tie you can make for the first blessing when you go for the Aliyah, for the Torah. Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamorach. It ain't necessarily so. You can see the resemblance, I think. So in this regard, there are some commentators amusingly note that while you can keep Gershwin out of shul, you can't keep the shul out of Gershwin. It Ain't Necessarily So, by the way, just to move on with that song, was a very powerful piece, especially as it did in 1943. This is after Gershwin's death, but during the height of World War II and the Shoah and the Holocaust. So when Porgy and Bess makes its European debut at Copenhagen at the Royal Danish Opera, the Nazis, enraged by the degenerate work, which was said, they said it was dominated by subhumans, considering it was written about Blacks by Jews. So the Nazis sought, but initially failed to shut down the production. But later in 1944, when the Nazis threatened to use the Luftwaffe to bomb the Royal Opera to rubble, the producers of that show decided that discretion is the better part of valor and ended the performances. However, here's an interesting fact. Danish radio responded by playing It Ain't Necessarily So, specifically that song, alongside Nazi propaganda broadcasts. When it debuted in 1935, this is 9 years earlier, the Gershwins turned down an offer from a very prominent Wall Street banker, Otto Kahn, K-A-H-N, to debut the work at the Metropolitan Opera. So Kahn was at that point the board chairman of the Met and could only offer a limited run for what the two brothers, Ira and George, like to call their folk opera. So they turned down the Met and partnered instead with a theater guild, which presented the work like a Broadway musical in the Alvin Ailey Theater, with 8 performances a week, including 2 matinees. We have to listen to some of this. This next piece, Bess, You Is My Woman Now, for me is one of the great duets in all of the history of opera. Let's listen to some of this. Gorgeous. and Summertime. Beautiful music. Genius. Gershwin's, remember when we talked about when he was a young boy, teenager, 13, 14, 15, he hung around the theater area, Second Avenue Theater, where, you know, the Gershwins lived, and he was an extra in some of the plays. Most of these plays were Yiddish produced theater. So it was obviously that kind of theater was very popular with Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. And that fact proved really important when Gershwin was invited to collaborate on a Yiddish operetta with Sholem Secunda, a gifted musician who was really infused with Jewish tradition. And, you know, we've done, and again, I don't want to overstate about Secunda right now because he has his own story, but those two are going to collaborate on again, I'm going to say it again, a Yiddish operetta. So in 1929, Gershwin signs a contract with the Metropolitan Opera Company to write an opera based on the Ansky, the Dybbuk, okay? And so he begins to create some music for that work, even planning to travel to Europe to study Jewish music traditions. He wanted to have greater authenticity to the music, obviously. So that proposed musical never materialized, however, because as it turns out, rights to the play had been already assigned to the Italian composer Lodovico Rocca, okay? I think it's a tragedy, but unfortunately, the ability to assess Gershwin's deliberate handling of Jewish material took a huge hit when he was forced to abandon that Dybbuk project. Although we do have an insight into the nature of the material provided by Gershwin's early biographer, Isaac Goldberg, who actually heard Gershwin play some of the proposed work. So here's Goldberg, his words. He turned the room into a synagogue with the indistinct prayer of those whom prayer has become a routine, such as any other, before coming to life as a Hasidic dance. Now, I, Joseph Ness, do not know if there are sketches to that. Maybe he threw them out. I haven't heard of sketches, but there is that kind of report written down by that biographer, Isaac Goldberg. According to many music historians, Gershwin's famous blue note technique, kind of jazz, using black notes as a real structural underpinning with the white notes, emerges from Jewish liturgical music, or I'm going to say possibly emerges from Jewish liturgical music. The opening cry, for example, of the Upward Slide in the Rhapsody in Blue has its roots in klezmer. It really does. By the way, one of his most famous tunes, Swonderful, seems to have been lifted intact from Noach's Tevye, Noah's Ark, in the Goldfaden operetta Akedat Yitzchak. So I don't have the score to that, but that music is available, and that would be interesting to listen to both songs next to each other. By the way, Goldfaden did much of his work in that Second Avenue theater where Gershwin was when he was a young boy. Gershwin tells composer Lazar Saminsky, great Jewish composer, a very important Jewish composer, not only of liturgical music, but of Yiddish song and that kind of thing. While I actually do not know much about, this is Gershwin speaking, while I actually do not know much about Jewish folk song, I think that many of my themes are Jewish in feeling. In a 1925 interview with a publication called The American Hebrew, Gershwin says this: the traditional Hebrew religious melodies have had a marked influence upon modern music, and that the Hebrew chants possess a particularly plaintive wail, which gives them a universal appeal. But why do you need me to talk about Gershwin? Let's listen to an interview. He'll talk about himself.
I cherished the desire to try the other end of the job and to do a little interviewing myself. So this afternoon I cornered George, asked questions very much at random, and took notes. I tried to think of questions you might ask yourselves if you had the opportunity. For instance, George, here's the query all composers encounter 3 times a day. When you work with your brother Ira, which comes first, the words or the music? Usually the music. I hit on a new tune, play it for Ira, and he hums it all over the place for a while until he gets an idea for the lyrics, and then we work the thing out together. Are you working on anything new right now, George? Yes, Ira and I are working on a new show called Pardon My English. The thing is already in rehearsal, and we're still trying to finish the score. What contemporary American composers do you most admire? Jerome Kern and Irving Berlin. Both of them have been very helpful to me. Incidentally, I believe Kern's Showboat score to be the finest light opera achievement in the history of American music. And I agree with you. Tell me, how did you get your start in music, George? Well, I left high school to take a job as a songwriter at Remick for $15 a week. That's 45 less than I used to get. Remember, I said I was going to ask questions any member of the audience might think of. How much money do you make with George? About half as much as you do, Rudy. How much is that? One third as much as I told you this afternoon, Eli. Now look, George, let's remember we're artists after all. One more question. Which of your show tunes do you prefer yourself? This one, Rudy.
So after the disappointing reception for Porgy and Bess, Gershwin moves to Hollywood in 1936 because of a commission by RKO Pictures to write the music for the film Shall We Dance? Starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. The idea was to marry ballet with jazz in a kind of a new way. This movie's a little over an hour. It took Gershwin several months to compose and orchestrate. Here is part of the movie. It's, I think it's wonderful to watch. Here we go. A couple of minutes from Shall We Dance and the song You Can't Take That Away From Me. Where is the button? There we go.
Right here, please. A corsage for the bride. Good.
Thank you, sir.
Well, tomorrow we'll be all straightened out. You'll be on your way, and I'll be on my way.
Where?
Well, I've got to get back to being a bachelor again. Sort of catch up with my usual gay life. Forget all this.
I hope you enjoy your gaiety.
Thanks. I hope you'll enjoy your divorce.
Thanks. I didn't know getting married was so depressing. I'm sorry now I asked you.
Oh, that's all right. I'll get over it.
Oh, of course.
Our romance won't end on a sorrowful note. So by tomorrow you're gone. The song is ended, but as the songwriter wrote, the melody lingers on. They may take you from me. I'll miss your fond caress. But though they take you from me, I'll still possess the way you wear your hat, the way you sip your tea, the memory of all that. Oh no, they can't take that away from me, the way your smile just beams, the way you sing off key, the way you haunt my dreams. No, no, they can't take that away from me. We may never, never meet again on the bumpy road to love, but I'll always, always keep the memory of the way you hold your knife, the way we danced till 3, the way you changed my life. No, no, they can't take that away from me. No, they can't take that away from me.
And the finale from Shall We Dance, we're almost completed with this talk, but a few more things I would like to say. But I think you want to see this finale. It's a fabulous one. Fred Astaire. Obviously, the one previous was the great Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and we'll see Fred Astaire doing something else.
From that long face, come on, have your fling. Why keep nursing the blues? If you want this old world on a string, put on your dancing shoes, stop wasting time. Put on your
your dancing shoes. Watch your spirits fly. Shall we dance or keep on moping? Shall we dance and walk on air? Shall we give in to despair? Or shall we dance with never a care? Life is short, we're growing older, don't you feel? And also, Ryan, you better dance, little lady, dance, little man. Dance whenever you can.
This much about the Hollywood year is undeniable. 1 second. What's not? Oh, something's, his phone is ringing. There we go. This is undeniable. George and Ira in 1936 moved to adjacent houses on North Roxbury Drive in Beverly Hills, where they penned some of their most enduring material. In fact, Ira continues to live there until his death in 1983. The decision to go west in 1936 had been mostly a financial one. Broadway was without a Gershwin hit since Of Thee I Sing nearly 5 years before. The plan was to make quick money in Hollywood, then return to New York for any number of other largely less commercial projects. As it turns out, the brothers scored the first film, Shall We Dance, as we just saw, picked up the option on a second, Damsel in Distress, and were starting on work on a third, The Goldwyn Follies, where George dies under a surgeon's knife. In that last year, the backyard on a given day might find Lillian Hellman, Oscar Levant, Harold Arlen, Yip Harburg, here's Yip, and obviously he is the composer, not composer, but the librettist of oh my God, what is it? The Wizard of Oz, the Wizard of Oz. Moss Hart was another person. Harpo Marx, Paulette Goddard. At the pool, composer Arnold Schoenberg plays tennis. Fanny Bryce planting flowers with dinners and poker games and other social festivities. Gershwin worked hard at those too. Gershwin writes, all the writing men and tunesmiths get together in a way that's practically impossible in the East Coast. I've seen a great deal of Irving Berlin and Jerome Kern at poker parties and dinners, and the feeling around here is very gemütlich. That was his word, gemütlich. During this time, George also tours the West Coast as a pianist, pursues his serious hobby of painting, and planned all manner of musical projects, from a second piano concerto to a new musical comedy with Kaufman and Hart. If he was downhearted and depressed, he put on a good front. Here is Kay Swift, who was a kind of a girlfriend of George. You were always at ease with George, she said in the living room of an apartment dominated by Gershwin memorabilia. He had a naturalness about him. If he were here right now, we'd probably walk over to the piano and play. Catherine Weber, Kay Swift's granddaughter, has suggested that her grandmother and George didn't marry because George's mother, Rose, was unhappy that Kay Swift wasn't Jewish. The Gershwins' 1926 musical, OK, was named for her. He told another romantic interest, thank God that your mother is Jewish. This Gershwin. Anyway, pianist, conductor Michael Tilson Thomas thinks Gershwin's music in the years just before his death was becoming more abstract, more operatic and symphonic. A tremendous sophistication born of the use of really writing the right notes for what the piece required. The commercial failure of Porgy and Bess, having left his theatrical urges, he discussed with the Santa Fe playwright Lynn Riggs the possibility of another opera, George Balanchine about a new ballet. So he was always involved in new projects. In 1937, he begins to complain of blinding headaches and reoccurring impression that he smelt burning rubber. Gershwin gives his last public performance, a concerto in F, with the Los Angeles Philharmonic on February 11th, 1937. Concert was a success, but at one point, a very un-Gershwinian thing happened. He stumbled over some chords in a difficult passage. In retrospect, this was surely a sign of the encroaching tumor. And the incident really bothered Gershwin sufficiently that he went to a doctor for a checkup. The checkup showed nothing abnormal. And by June, 5 months later, he was experiencing coordination difficulty and extreme irritability, not characteristic because he was really easygoing for all his life. This time he goes to a doctor. There was a tumor, but it was too late. He collapses at the home of Yip Harburg, the Wizard of Oz librettist. Kay Smith, his girlfriend, was not the last to see him, but she was perhaps the first to know that he died. It's kind of a weird story. She was at a movie at Radio City. This is her talking. I was at a movie at Radio City with my daughter, April. She recalls the afternoon of July 11th, 1937. Suddenly, I stood up and said, we're leaving. We got up the aisle and April asked me, what's wrong? And I said, George is dead. When Kay Smith got home, the phone call came. And here's Kay Smith again saying, not Kate Smith, Kay Smith, okay? She says, I think when something happens to someone you love, you know it, don't you? After Gershwin's tragic death from a brain tumor, 2 simultaneous bi-coastal Jewish funeral services were held for him, one at the Emmanuel Temple, Temple Emmanuel, I think it is, in New York City, officiated by Rabbi Nathan Perlman, and one at the Temple B'nai B'rith, now known as the Wilshire Boulevard Temple in Los Angeles. We end with a little snippet of Thee I Sing, the title of this lecture.
Of thee I sing, baby, summer, autumn, winter, spring, baby, you're my silver lining, you're my sky of blue. There's a love light shining just because of you. Of thee I sing, baby, you have got that certain thing, baby, shining star and inspiration, worthy of a mighty nation. Of thee I sing. Of thee I sing, baby, summer, autumn, winter, spring, baby, you're my silver lining, you're my sky of blue. There's a love light shining just because of you. Of thee I sing, baby, you have got that certain shining star and inspiration, worthy of the mighty nation.
So George Gershwin is a light in our musical history, someone who inspires us always to listen, to keep listening to music, Thank you, everybody. Real pleasure doing this lecture.
Thank you, Cantor Ness. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks
Joseph,
so much.
you got a quick question?
Absolutely.
Shall We Dance that we saw with Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire. In The King and I, the big dance scene, they danced to Shall We Dance. But I never saw any reference to Gershwin in the, as to who wrote the music or whatever in the program credits.
Are you talking about The King and I?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not Gershwin.
So it's a different Shall We Dance. It's the same.
Yeah, I would assume
Oh,
so.
yeah.
Yeah, no question.
Shall we dance? Dun-dun-dun.
Right.
Ah,
Right.
Different, I think.
Cantor, thank you very much. That was
Well,
excellent.
Absolutely. Thank you so
I
much.
loved it.
I would like to thank,
It
I would
was
like to thank
terrific.
everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for signing up and coming to this program. Just want to let you know that the High Society will be planning new programs over the next couple months, both hoping to get back inside live for programs, and then if we can't, we'll do Zoom or we'll do both. But stay tuned. Mike Cabot and I and Corinne will be meeting to start some planning. So again, I thank everybody. Thank Cantor Ness for such a wonderful program.
Right. Hi, it's Roz. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Cantor.
Absolutely. Nice seeing you, Roz.
Good to see you.
Terrific.
And
Wonderful program.
Wonderful program.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Al.
Wonderful.
thanks to
Very
you.
inspiring and educational for me.
Right. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
What's the
very
next
much.
one? What's the next one we can do?
I've got them. You want them? I have them.
Good.
Do
Good.
another one.
Good.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks so
Thanks.
much.
Nice seeing everybody.
I
You
see
too.
All of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
It was a good suggestion.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul, for help.
Good job.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yep. Hi, Judy now.
Hi, good
Hi.
program. I love
Yeah,
it.
wonderful. Excellent. Thank you.